Good afternoon, everybody. This is Hsl Meredith, MeredithImages. Thank you for joining us today for what I'm hoping should be the first of a series of webinars I want to do for you guys. Today we're going to be talking about creativity with Photoshop and Topaz. So right now you should just be seeing my screen with Photoshop on it and the welcome slide kind of telling you what we're going to talk about. So we're going to get rolling. My wonderful hubby Dave is sitting at the computer next to me at his desk, and he's going to try and read some questions when they come over. So try and go ahead and type those if you have questions as we go. I'm sure I won't be able to answer all of them, but if he finds there are some that are really pertinent to what I'm doing, he'll interrupt me and we will try and get those answered for you, and then hopefully have some time at the end to get to some other questions. Yes, dear. Yes, you can always send me an email afterwards if you can't get it typed in here. So this is our first one using Zoom for our webinar, so hopefully it runs pretty smoothly. And again, thanks for joining us, and I've got some things on sale and things we'll talk about at the end, and I'll put that slide up for you then. I'm also recording this webinar, so hopefully that will go good and we can send you out the link at least by tomorrow, and then we'll go from there. So thanks again. Okay, so for our first image, I'm going to open up my first project here. So I work with two screens for those of you who've never seen me do a webinar before. So sometimes you'll see images just sort of appear because I'm either dragging them from the other screen or opening from there rather than going up to my file and open in Photoshop, because it just speeds things up a little bit. So this image is one I took just last week. Dave and I went out for a drive to get out of the house for a little while. And this is a barn not too far away from where we live here in Tennessee now. So this was a 3-shot HDR, which I processed in Photomatix. So I've gotten all my basic editing done on this particular image, and I'm going to show you how I got some creative processes done on this next. So what I always do once I'm here in Photoshop, I'm going to hit Control-J, my keyboard shortcut, to duplicate that background layer, because we always want to work on a different layer. And then I go up to my filter, Studio 2, and go into Studio. Another thing too, I also have the notes that I'm using that I'm working through this webinar, I'm going to have for sale in my Peacock Studio store on the website for just $5. And that will include all of these notes with the detailed settings that I'm using, as well as these images and textures that you'll see me use today. So all of that you can get if you'd like to at the end of the webinar. I've already got it in the store, so it's ready to go. Alrighty, so now we're over here in our Topaz Studio. And the first thing that I decided to do with this, and if you're fairly new to Topaz or have not used Topaz, Studio is its latest workspace. This particular version, Studio 2, came out last summer. I also did a webinar for Topaz on kind of how to navigate around this product, which you can find on the Topaz YouTube channel. But the basic setup of this is you can either add a filter, which lets you do all of these different things. They're separated by essential filters, creative filters, and stylistic filters. And then we have the add look category, which we're always called presets on all their other products. So if you hear me say a preset, that's what I'm talking about, is a look, because I still like to call them that. So for this first step, we're going to go into our add a filter, and these little blue hearts just mean these are things that I use quite often, so I've favorited those just by clicking in the heart. And if you want to see a shortened list, you can just click your favorites, just so you don't have to scroll as far through everything if you'd like. So first I'm going to add Hsl Color Tuning. And each time you open one of these filters or looks, you'll get a control panel where you can adjust everything. And for this one, I wanted to go into the red and bring down that saturation just a teeny bit. The roof was a pretty bright red, but I think this was just a little too bright. So we're going to come down to about 0.27 negative. And then I wanted to up the blue a little bit for the sky. So we're going to click on the blue filter. And you'll notice as I hover over one of these colors, those diagonal red lines are telling me where blue is in this particular image, or etc., the green or whatever. So let me get into the blue, and then I think Dave's got a question, but I'm going to finish this step first. So we got blue, and we're going to go up a little bit with that. I just wanted to get a little more pop of blue to that sky because it was a really pretty blue sky day. So now with the newer studio as well, you can also, we're doing actual layering. So you can see here's my original image, then our color tuning. This X will just close this dialog box, and I'm going to go on and add another filter, and I'm going to do precision detail. And in here, I just wanted to up this a little bit, my small detail 0.15. And these numbers I've written down so that I could replicate this for you. But normally you'll just, move these sliders until you get a look that is what you like. And we'll go about there. And I wanted to bring in the detail to the barn and the ground, but I really didn't want more detail in the sky. So I'm going to add a layer mask to this adjustment so that I can mask that away. The way we do that, it's pretty similar to Photoshop. On this layer, we're just going to click the little mask icon, and that's going to open up a box down here. And instead of starting with the brush like we typically do in Photoshop, there are also other ways we can select the colors and create a mask. And to get this one a little moved along a little quicker, I'm going to click on color, and I'm going to click up here in my sky. And we're going to see what we get. You can see it did a pretty decent job of masking the sky, although it didn't completely leave this open. It masked that a little bit. So now that we've done this, I'm going to switch over to the brush, and I want it to be actually at white because I want to get rid of the mask here. I'm going to bring, the size is pretty good. So you use the sliders here to change the radius of your brush, and then when you change the softness, and I'm going to go, actually I want to go the other way because I want it to be a harder brush. You'll see that there's it's kind of hard to see, a faint green circle around the red circle there. The difference between the red and the green circle is the softer area. So the lower I go with the softness, you'll see there's no green circle. And then if we go all the way the other way, you'll see there's a very small red circle with a large green. So that's how you can tell how soft your brush is. So I'm going to come down just a little bit here. And I'm just going to do a quick little mask. And you'll see the red is telling me where I'm masking. So as long as I haven't let up on my mouse button, it will stay giving me all this red. And I'm just going to do this really quickly for you. And a couple more swipes. And then when I let go of the mouse, we'll give it a second. And there we go. So you can see I've masked. So now we have our mask on the sky. So only the sky is masked and not the building or the ground. So our detail adjustment is on the building and the ground. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop now. I've done these few things, and since we came in from Photoshop, all we have to do is click this accept check up here on the top toolbar, and that will send us back to Photoshop. And you'll see this was our original. So if I turn this off, you can see the slight difference in the colors, and there's our layer with the adjustments we just made. Now what I like to do when I'm doing these projects for myself, because I will forget later what did I do here, is you can rename your layer, and you can just say we did an Hsl and precision detail. And obviously when I'm, like I said, when I'm doing this thinking I'm going to do it for a project, then I'll actually write down the settings so that I can replicate it for you. So now I'm going to duplicate that layer again, and I'm going to go back over to our Topaz. So filter Studio 2. And this time I'm going to add a texture. So we're going to click on our add a filter, texture. And you can, the groups will give you, well, if you just want to see textures and nothing else, you can click there. And then there are different categories of textures that they're by style, but there's also a category for MeredithImages because there are 59 of my textures that come with this program built in. So I am going to choose, and they are alphabetical, so if you hover over it, you can see that there is a name to these, which is something they added recently, which is wonderful. And I'm going to use this Golden Sunrise. And this is just a graduated texture I created. And I really want it's darker on the bottom than the top, but I want the darker area on the top of the image. So I'm going to click on Flip Vertical, and it's going to flip that texture. So the darker part is at the top. So now the way we make textures work with our images is by changing blending modes and opacities. So I'm going to do this one at multiply, which is going to darken it a little. Then I'm going to bring my opacity back to about 30%. So you can see if we turn the eyeball on and off, there's the before the texture and then after. So we've just kind of given it even a little more drama than it already had. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop. And now I'm going to bring in one of my own textures from a separate file. Hang on one second. Dave's pointing out a question here. Okay, so this is a good question. Somebody's asking why I go back and forth from Photoshop to Topaz. I'm going to show you a couple different ways that you can work with the programs, because you can do everything in Topaz if you choose. My workflow is usually I start in Lightroom and I do my basic adjustments there, or in this case it was an HDR image, so I did them in Photomatics. And then I go from Lightroom into Photoshop. And I like doing things on separate layers here in Photoshop. I find that easier, and it's I don't know. I find it it's hard to describe. It's kind of become my workflow over the years. There really isn't a right or wrong way. And the next time I go back into Studio, I'm going to show you can also, with Studio 2, because you can save layers, you can export it as a TS2 file and keep those layers. However, a TS2 file is proprietary to Topaz, just like a PSD file is proprietary to Adobe. So you can't open a TS2 file in Photoshop, but you can, and just like you can't open a PSD file in other programs. So by going back and forth from Photoshop to Topaz, I then save my file as a TIFF file. So I still have my layers, but then I have more versatility to open it either here or in another editing program. Occasionally I'll use Affinity or something else. So that's my main reason, is I just like the flexibility of having things on separate layers, but yet being able to have a format that's a more universal format. Good question. Thank you. Oh, what? Hang on, one more.
Can you point to specific parts in the photo that would affect them with small, medium, large details or reference?
Okay, somebody asked about with the detail adjustments, which part of the photos were affected by the small and medium details. So it's going to be, I mean, we're already past that right now, but I'll try and cover that when I get back in there. So the smaller details are going to be just that, you know, things like little blades of grass or things that are just smaller images, or not smaller images, but smaller parts of the photos, where something like the large detail is going to affect your clouds and things that are a more consistent tone of color like that. And I'll try and touch on that again when we get back in there. So thank you. Alrighty, so let's go on and bring in a texture. So I'm dragging this from the other screen, and I'm going to bring in a texture for my own. This is from one of my computer created grunge textures that's in my store. So I've brought this in, and because I dragged it in, it gave me the handle, so I can just move this and resize it very easily. And what I actually want to do with this particular texture is I want the texture to be under my image, which I don't typically do, but with this one, I really wanted to get the kind of linen feel of it, but I don't want the color of it. So I'm actually going to change this texture to a black and white. So I'm going to turn off my top layer for a second so you can see this happening. So I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to click the black and white adjustment. And I'm just going to make this a black and white. And you can, move the sliders if you want some areas to be lighter and darker based on the colors in the original image. And it was a brownish color, so I'm going to keep it about there. Now I only want this black and white to apply to this texture and not anything else, even though we have this copied on top. I really want it to just apply to this. So I'm going to group these two layers, and I like the keyboard shortcut Control-Alt-G, G for grouping, and you'll see that little down arrow is telling you that this adjustment is only going to affect this layer. So I'm going to turn my top layer back on, and just like when we were working with the texture in Studio, the way that we make them blend is again by changing blending modes. And this one I'm going to use overlay. And then I'm going to bring it down about 85%. I need it to be a little transparent so we can see some of that texture come through. And actually, I want to change this one. Why is that not showing through? Okay, what did I do wrong? I'm trying to read my notes and do this at the same time. So I moved my texture down here. Regroup that. Did I change the wrong? Oh, because I changed that to overlay rather than this. So I need to change our image to overlay. There we go. That makes more sense. And then we can bring that down a little as well. So let's change this back to that's normal. And there we go. I bring down a little bit more. There we go. That's better. Okay, so helps when you're on the right layer, which is easy to do when you start bouncing back and forth. So don't get frustrated like me and just keep giving it a try. So what I did was I changed the blending mode to make this layer interact with that layer beneath it. Now, the last thing I wanted to do to this was to add a vignette to darken my edges just a little bit. And there's an easy way to do this in Photoshop, and I'm going to show you how to do that. We're going to add a new blank layer above this image. And I'm going to fill this layer with black. So my foreground color is black. I'm just going to hit Alt backspace and fill my layer with black. I'm going to grab my my elliptical marquee tool. I'm going to put my cursor way up at the top left, click, and drag down to the lower right. You can get the pink lines to be precise, but we're pretty close to that. Now I want to delete this center, but if I deleted it now, that's going to have a very hard edge to it. So I'm going to go up to my select key, modify, and feather it. And because I know this is a large image, I'm going to leave it at 250 pixels and say OK. And you'll see how it like jumped a little bit because it's actually making this circle slightly smaller, but it's softening those edges. So now all I'm going to do is hit the delete key on my keyboard, or the backspace will work as well, and take out that center. Control D will deselect my selection. And now we can adjust the opacity. And we're going to come down to just about like 35% or so. So you can see without it and with it. So we just darken those edges a little. And I like to do vignettes so that somebody looking at the image isn't going to even realize that it's there, but it's going to help draw your viewer's eye into your picture. And that is the end of project 1. Hold on one second. Dave's pointing out a question. Oh, I got to scroll down. Okay. I noticed that the sky through the openings in the barn did not seem to get adjusted. Is there any way to include them in your sky selection, or must we do it manually? Well, there's not a whole lot of sky showing, and that's probably because I masked that area. So that's why when we did those 2 adjustments, it didn't adjust those. If you didn't mask those 2 parts out, it should have been the same. So hopefully that answers your question. But yes, it is. There's just a little bit of sky showing right there. Somebody's asking how Topaz compares with Luminar, and I really haven't used Luminar very much yet, so I can't honestly answer that question. I've heard lots of good things about Luminar, but it's just not one that I've used a lot, so I can't really say for sure. Okay, so we're going to go on to our next project. So this one. Oh, so yep. So I'm working with 2 screens. You may not have been listening. If you only have one screen to bring your image into Photoshop, let's close that. You would just go File, Open, and navigate to. In this case, we'd be going here, and then we'd be going up to my webinars, and here, and here, and here's all the files that we're working with. So that I would click on that one. So that's why I like having the 2 screens, and I'm lucky that I do. I know not everybody has that capability, especially if you're working on a laptop. So I typically just drag things from the other screen, especially when I'm doing a program like this. It just makes it go a little bit quicker. So what I wanted to do with this image was, I thought it was a pretty flower, but it definitely needs some work. The background is very so that's what we're really going to focus on changing in this image. And I did do a little bit of a shortcut here. So I'm going to show you what I did, but I'm going to show you the kind of pre-done image we're going to work with. So the first thing I wanted to do here was to flop this image so it was leaning towards the right rather than towards the left. So we're going to go up under our image rotation, and I'm just going to flip the canvas horizontal. So that was the way I decided I wanted to work with this image. And I'm going to do my Control J, and I'm going to hide my background layer because I'm going to delete the background here. So I just want to get rid of this whole background. And I started by using the Magic Wand tool, and it did a fairly good job. I'm going to hold down the Shift key to add to my selection. And I know I'm going a little quick because I'm going to cover a lot of stuff for you. Again, if you do want to get the notes, you have all the details, and you can actually, with the images, then practice and replicate these projects yourself. So I spent a lot of time really going in here and making a really, really clean selection here. So in order to just save time, I'm going to bring in the image that is already got the selection made. And I do give you both in the samples as well. So let's turn that one off. And you'll see now we have we can actually delete these two, that one. now we have our clean selection. So I've gotten rid of all of that annoying background, and now we're going to create a new background by bringing in several textures. But first, we're going to go into Topaz and do a few things. So we're going to go to our filter, studio. And again, this is, totally my workflow. You can choose to do more of this work right in Studio if you wish. I just find going back and forth from Photoshop comfortable, and that's my particular workflow. So I'm going to go into my add a filter, and this image has not been edited at all yet. So I'm going to go into AI Clear, which is what I typically do first when I bring a photo in here. And what AI Clear does is it's detail, clarity, and denoise all at once. And 99% of the time, the default when you first click it is going to look great. And you can see that it's cleaned it up really nicely. It's, I think, the best product Topaz has ever created. I use it, like I said, on every image. So next I'm going to go back into our precision detail. Even though AI Clear did some detail on this, I want to make things pop just a little bit more. So I'm going to zoom in so you can maybe see it a little better. So again, we're going to do some small detail, and I'm just making really small changes. I'm not pushing this. If you go way too far, let's see what happens if we go over here. Yeah, see how it starts getting that overcooked kind of a look, and that's not what we're going for. So I'm going to bring this back down here to about 13. And then the medium, I went to 0.08. And then the large, 0.10. And anytime too, you want to see like a before and after. If you go up under the View tab, you can do a split horizontal screen with the slider. So you can see there's your before and there's our after. You can see how it's crisping things up a little bit more. So this is a good way to, if you can't really see what it's doing, it's a good way to allow you to get a better view of it. And then the one other thing I wanted to do was some noise reduction. So I'm going to go back up here and do reduce noise. And I'm going to do, again, just a very little bit. And the fine noise, just a little bit. So again, here's our before, and there's the after. I can see it, especially up in here, really cleaning that up nicely. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to Photoshop, where we're going to now add our textures behind this image. Okay, so let's bring in, I'm actually going to add 4 textures that I ended up creating our background with. So I'm going to bring in the first one. And again, because I'm dragging it in, it gives me the handles automatically, and I'm going to rotate this so I don't have to stretch it as far. And a hint, when you start rotating something like this, when you get close to square, if you hold down the Shift key, it's going to give you an exact horizontal so that you're not trying to, eyeball it all the time. I'll click that, and then I'm going to bring this down behind our layer. Excuse me. Grab a sip of water. Okay, so that's our first texture. And then we're going to bring in this one called Golden. Again, I'm going to rotate this one, resize it. Whoops. Excuse me. Hey, when I do that. So I'm gonna, excuse me, change the blending mode on this one to overlay. And lower the opacity to 89%. Excuse me. Sorry about that, folks. So I'm going to bring in number 3, which is silver. Come on. Oops, I didn't hit the, see, it's not letting me bring the other one because I forgot to hit the check mark up here. So let's do that. Now we can bring in our next one. And we're going to rotate that one. These are my textures. Somebody just asked if these were my own. These are all from different groups in the store. These last two, the golden and the silver, were from a free set that I gave away at Christmas, but that's also still available in the store. And everything is on sale right now. I have some new textures that I released about a week ago that are 50% off, and it's already set to that price in the store. They're different sets of brushes and textures, and then I have some sets that I'm going to be discontinuing, and those are marked down from $6 to $2, so they're 66% off. And then there's a coupon code I'm going to give you at the end. Everything else in the store, all the other textures, ebooks, and even my online one-on-one training sessions are all 25% off, and that's till the end of the month. So this one we're going to change to soft light, and I'm going to leave it at 100%. And then the last one I'm bringing in is a darker brown. And this one's kind of got a built-in vignette. I created it with a vignette already on it. And this one we're going to change to darken and 61%. Again, it was trial and error. Working with textures is a lot of trial and error, and sometimes, you know, or the more that you work with them, the more you'll get a feel for how things may work together. I was looking to create something in a tone that would be pleasing with the orange flowers, so that was why I started with this the pale tan bokeh one, and then I decided to bring in the golden, and then the silver just gave it some more texture because it was pretty much a black and white already. And then I warmed it up a little more with this dark brown one. And we've got that one all set, so we are good there. So this would be the first layer. And I did actually, even though this has a little bit of vignette, I'm going to go ahead and add another one like we just did in the other image. I'm going to create my own. I'm going to fill this layer with the black, Alt backspace, grab that marquee again. I just wanted to darken that vignette just a hair. And select modify feather. Okay. Delete. Control D. And we're going to bring this percentage way down as well to about 30%. So around there. There you go. So now we have a little bit more of a vignette. And here is a cool trick. When I had done this one, I was like, well, the vignette is nice and even, but with the point of the flower kind of leaning, I almost wanted my vignette to be slightly off center. So I'm going to take this layer. I'm going to do Control T to get the transform handles. And I'm actually going to angle this layer so the vignette changes a little bit. And then we can just make this a little bit bigger so it will cover our image. So it made it circle this flower a little bit better. And then I did add a layer mask because I didn't really want to darken this part of the flower. So just with a round brush, I'm just going to brush this vignette off of that corner of the image. Just make it bigger. So I wanted to leave it here, here, and here, but I really didn't want it over that. Or I could have probably brought it behind the image, which would have done the same thing, but since we have it on top, I just masked a little bit away. So that was version 1 of this image. And so then I decided, as I often do, what else can I do to this? So now I want to start playing with this in Topaz using some of the cool settings in Remix. But now if I open Topaz right now, it's going to bring in only the top layer. We want to bring in everything we've done. We want to bring this as one image. So there's a couple ways you could do this. We could either save it as a JPEG to flatten it, or because I don't really want to flatten this yet, I'm going to create a merged layer above this layer that includes everything beneath it. And the way we're going to do that, it requires a few keystrokes and fingers. It's Control, Alt, Shift, and the letter E. And of course, I'm not clicked on the right layer. And Control, Alt, Shift, E. And that creates a merged layer, and you could name it that. I usually do, so I remember why that layer is there and what it is. That layer now contains all of these layers beneath it. So if we needed to go back and change something else here, we would just have to delete that layer, but we could still have our layers to work with if we wanted to change other things there. So now when we go into our Photoshop or into our studio, it will see that complete layer and bring that in so that we can play some more. Okay, Dave's got a couple questions. Yes. The vertical toolbar on the right side of.
I asked a question here.
I'm not sure if
Topaz.
Topaz or still this toolbar. Oh, I think I know what he means. All right, I'll answer that in a second when I get back to Photoshop. Superior to Topaz. Why is Topaz superior to Photoshop to accomplish these tasks? A lot of it you could do in Photoshop. I think a lot of it is much easier to do in Topaz. These creative effects would compile a whole lot of other processes in Photoshop. These quick, as you're going to see, these filters and looks that we're going to do really are not available in Photoshop because these are all presets. I think Topaz is far superior at the sharpening and the denoise and things like that than Photoshop is. Again, my personal opinion. I've been using Topaz back since the very beginning. Their first product was the original Topaz Adjust. I had seen Tony Sweet demonstrate that at our NECCC conference. Gosh, like probably about 14, 15 years ago. And I was hooked. I immediately purchased that product at the conference, and I've been using Topaz products ever since, long before I was doing any webinars for them or anything else. So I really am a true user, not just somebody who's, I'm not a Topaz advocate. I don't work for Topaz. I am an affiliate. So if you purchase something with my link, I do make a small commission, but that's not why I do what I do. I've been using Topaz a lot longer than I've been, working with them. Okay, so for version 2, we are now in here, and the one that I decided I liked was this one called Crinkled Portrait. Again, you can go through if you want to try Remix. It has some of the effects are really extreme. Some are pretty cool. And then once you get into each one, there are different things you can change within each preset. And you can also change how strong the particular style is. And this was one that I liked. So what I would do is, okay, I like this. So now let's go back to Photoshop. And then I would do a file, save as, and save this one. And I did not duplicate that layer, and I should have, which would have been a quicker way, because then we could just delete the second layer and still have our merged layer. So I'm just going to cheat and go back in my history panel here. Okay, so we go. So now I'm going to Control J. And then that way, when we place something else on here from Topaz, we can just delete that layer after you've saved it and try a different effect. So I think what Serge was asking about was this toolbar that I have here in my Photoshop. And this is one, and you can modify all your toolbars. If you go up under your window menu, you have all of these different options and tools, and these are other plugins and things that I have. This is Group Brushes, which is another company I work with. He's got fabulous brushes, and I use, they're designed for digital painting, but I actually use them to create textures. A lot of my textures I've created with these, and he's got a whole set. If anybody's interested in knowing more about those, let me know, because I probably can get you a discount code on that. These are ones that I bought for a font manager and a brush manager. And this is another company I've done some stuff with Layer Cake with some other presets and effects. So you can control, these are all your brush and settings and panels and spacing and things when you're working with fonts. So that's what this panel is for. So a lot of these are other products, and then these are typical Photoshop ones up top. All right, so let's go back into our studio. Wow, it's 4:41 already? Oh boy, I'm not going to get through all my projects. I got to go faster. All right, so I'm going to go back into our remix, but you guys have had great questions, so that's a good thing. And the two other ones in here, and I'm not going to go back and forth. I'm going to show you the two while we're in here. The next one that I liked was Desert Prism. And the blue bar shows you the progress of it applying something. So that was another one I liked. So I could go back and I would save this one. And then the other one that I liked was called Tranquil Retreat. And these are also in alphabetical order, which makes them easier to find. I think this one was my favorite out of the three. So again, you could take this now back to your Photoshop and then do a file save as and save that version of it as well. Alrighty, so let's move on. Yes, dear, what's your question?
You got your texture into the layers panel. I thought we discussed that, but
My textures into Topaz?
how did you say that? I would love to get the answer to this stuff. She clicked to get her texture into the layers panel.
Okay, I will show you that in this project. Somebody was asking how I brought the textures into the layers panel. So I'll show you that in 1 second. All right, so this image was another one that I took nearby here. I just love bare trees and unfortunately dead trees sometimes. This one isn't, it's just not in bloom yet. But I even though this one had more going on, I just thought it was kind of a cool image and I liked the sky, but there was a lot more detail in the sky. So we're going to try and draw out this drama, and we're going to create something pretty dramatic with this. So we're going to go into our studio, and I duplicated my layer first. And we're going to do our AI clear. And typically I would go back to Photoshop and come back in, but just so we can speed it up a little, I'm going to do the second step right here. And I'm going to add another filter. Actually, I'm going to add a look, sorry. And the one I want, because I know what it's called, I can hit this little magnifying glass and just type in the name. So it makes it a little quicker, and it's Dramatic HDR. And it's loading, as you can see. So when you get into the looks, you can click on different ones to see what they look like once they're done loading. And then if I see this one, I go, oh, I like that, and I want to use that one, then you hit apply, and that adds it to the layer stack and will give you whatever controls there are for that particular preset. So this one, this has these three different things comprise that preset. So I could click on each one of these and go in and make changes if I wanted. So you're not limited to just what the look shows you. You can change it if you wish, but I think that looks pretty good the way it is. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop and I'm going to add a couple textures to this, and this will answer the question of how I brought these in. Okay, come on, there we go. So you can see already we've gone from that to a much more dramatic image, much more pleasing image. And what I did do was Control J, duplicate this again, and use a combination of the healing brush and the clone tool to get rid of these power lines over here. I think most of you probably know how to do that. So this is just the healing brush. And that usually does a pretty good job of something like this, especially when it's very light. So I'm not going to do them all in the essence of time, but you get the idea here. So we got rid of all of those. So now I'm going to bring in two textures. So again, I've been dragging them from another screen, but if you want to open them this way, we'll go File, Open, and we're going to use this one first. Okay, so now I want to bring this texture into my working image. So we're going to use the Move tool. So you can see I have two images open now. I have my photo and I have my texture. So with the Move tool, I'm going to grab this tab and pull down so that I can see both images. And I'm going to just click anywhere in this texture, click, hold with the left mouse button, and drag it over on top of my image. And there is my texture. So now I just need to resize it. And I also want, because it's green over here and blue over here, I want the blue on top and the green on the bottom. So I'm going to rotate this first, like we did with the others. And then I'm going to size it to cover my image. So we've got the blue on top and the green on the bottom. And for this one, and this is from one of my Cosmos collections, I created these on my iPad. I'm going to bring in, so we rotated it, we're going to change this one to multiply and bring the opacity down to 82%, which I thought was a pretty cool look. And then I tried another texture on top of this. And we also have to hit that check mark up there or it won't let us bring in something else. So we can go back to our file, open. And I also want to use this other Cosmos one. Same thing, we're going to drag this down. And everything too that I'm showing you today can be done in Photoshop Elements if you're an Elements user. Instead of seeing tabs at the top, you'll have the photo bin at the bottom, and you would just do the same thing and drag your texture up from there. So all of these processes can be done with Elements. So let's line this one up and resize it. We'll hit that. And for this one, I'm going to change it to multiply as well. And we're going to bring this back about 47%. And that's our image. Now, I did think that it was a little too green down here on the grass. So I'm going to go back to this first layer. I'm going to add a layer mask. And again, grab my brush. I've got a soft round brush. Let's make it smaller. The brush is at 77%. That's good. So it's not quite taking all of the texture off at once. I can kind of see how it looks. And I just want to take it off this grass down here and bring a little more of that original color back. So our cows don't look green either. And there we go. So that looks a little better. You can see here where I've masked it away. Now I could do the same thing here because it's not a whole lot of an area to mask. It wouldn't take a long time to just mask it again. But sometimes you've masked something and it's a very complicated selection. So a way that you can duplicate a mask to another layer is click on the layer mask, right click in it, and say Add Mask to Selection. And then you're going to click on the layer you want to add the new mask to. Just highlight that layer and then click the new mask icon, and it's going to duplicate that mask. So I think that's a really cool trick. It took me a long time to remember those steps for some reason. It's those things you don't use all the time, so you kind of have to think about it a little bit. But that's a really cool little trick to have. And we are already at 10 minutes of, oh my goodness, and I had 3 more projects I wanted to show you. I guess that's not going to happen. We're going to have to save those for another webinar. We'll have to do a part 2. But all of these images and the ones that we're not going to get to, I'm going to try and do one more really quick one. The next one is more complicated, so we're going to skip that one for now. Let's close this one. And I'm going to bring over this image. And this is another way to just use some textures and create some cool skies. This was an image, Dave actually took this, he was out, actually he was going to do a dump run one morning and took a little drive to see what he could see, and found this scene and took this just with his cell phone. So let's see, where's am I missing a page? So, all right, so I'm going to, with this one, I want to show you one cool thing, well, not a cool thing, but something to know about when you're working with Photoshop, or with Topaz, sorry, keep getting the two mixed up. So this one I wanted to straighten this a little bit. So I'm going to use my crop tool. I'm going to put my cursor outside of it because it gives me the grid, and then I want to straighten it so that the buildings look a little straighter. And then I'm going to say accept that. So now if I go right from here, if you do any kind of cropping or straightening in Photoshop, and then you go to Studio, it doesn't recognize the crop. And I'm going to show you what happens when it opens. See how I still have this because I've straightened it? If I had cropped it, it would still have shown me the full image, which sometimes you want to crop it first, especially if you're doing an effect that's going to affect the edges of an image. So I'm going to cancel here, go back to Photoshop. So the way around this is because I have duplicate layers, I'm just going to go layer flatten, reduplicate it, and then go into Photoshop from there. And it would work fine. So I'm just going to show you really quickly. Oh, I know what I wanted to show you. Let's go this way. I do want to show you how to add your own textures to Studio. All right, so here's our image. So I want to go into Add a Filter, Texture. So these are all the ones that come with the product. And if you go again into the category, you'll see there's a whole bunch of other categories here that you're not going to see in your version of Studio. And I started with MI because I know that's my Meredith images. These are all of my own textures I've brought in. So the way you can do that is where the category is, this little icon to the right, that's going to open up your category manager. So you can click on category, create your own category. So I'm going to call it webinar. Say OK. And then from there, you're going to click on import texture. And I want to bring in this one. And you can bring in as many as you want at a time. You're not limited to one. They just have to be in the same folder. So you could select them all. I'm going to say OK. And there's the texture that we just brought in. So when I close this and I go back to my category list, now there is that category called webinar. And there's our texture. So we can now apply that texture to our image. So I have it selected, and I'm going to start playing with my blending mode. Let's go into the darken. Let's go to multiply. And I'm going to up that. Not quite that dark. Now, the one thing that I noticed with this texture, the texture goes all the way down here, of course, and it has some cool little clouds that I really would like at the horizon. We can actually move our texture as well in here. If you click on this edit button, we can now slide that texture up. And if you need to, you can also make it bigger than your photo. And then click the edit again when you're done. And then I can create a layer mask so I get rid of that edge there, because I don't really want that texture on my ground. So I'm going to do this real quick. So you can see where the edge of that texture is there. Now the texture is only on the sky, which is what we wanted, to add some more drama to this. And then we can go back to our Photoshop, and there's our layer with that texture. And then I did bring in one more texture. Actually, I did an alternate version. I saved this one. Let's get rid of that for a second. And I'm going to show you another one I did with one of my other. This is actually two of my Cosmos blended together. And for this one, I'm going to do multiply. So give it more of a night sky look. And again, we can add a layer mask, brush, and really quickly get rid of some of that texture. So that's some of the cool things you can do with textures. The other two projects that are, let me close this, I'll show you what the finished ones look like and that are in the notes. I did this orchid bud. Come on. And you can see all of the layers here. I did AI clear. I did some cloning and healing because there was a really dark area, whoops, around the original here that I didn't like. So I did some cloning and healing to get rid of that. Then I did one of those Control-Alt-Shift-E merge layers and did a couple presets in Topaz, and then a couple of my own textures that are in Topaz. And then the one last picture is this goldfinch, and we added a little bokeh to the background to give it a little more punch. And then I just masked that off of the bird after we did a few adjustments in our studio. So we are just about at 5 o'clock already. I can't believe how quickly that went. So let me see if there's any questions here that I can answer really quick. Okay, when you save your edited images, do you leave all of the layers or merge them down? I always save my images first as a TIFF file so that I keep my layers. So if I go back to it tomorrow and I say, well, maybe I didn't like this background, I can just delete that and, you know, drag that to the trash and add something else instead. I have that flexibility. So I will first save it as a TIFF, and then if I'm going to use it either to make a print or you know, use it for a competition or something like that, then I'll resize it and save it as a JPEG. So that's a good question. That's fine. Are there still shared group? Oh, are there still shared group textures in texture effects? The old texture effects is no longer being updated because it is the part of Studio now. So the community, they used to have community presets and things. Those are not available in Studio 2. They may come up with some other way. They were talking about creating some kind of a forum where people could share things. I think it was just bogging the system down because there were so many of them. I know Dave created a bunch in Studio One. If you have any in Studio One that you like and you want to bring them to Studio Two, you can favorite them in Studio One, and then up under the help menu in Studio, you can import them from there. So you can bring them over to Two, but they're not letting you add new ones. And I think that should just about do it. We're right at 5 o'clock. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to email me at any time. Let me bring up my final slide here for you with some sales and information. So here's what we were talking about before. My website is MeredithImages.com. If you go to either click on Peacock Studio, that will bring you to the products page with all of the things I mentioned, the new textures that are on sale, retiring textures, 25% off any of my other textures or ebooks that are not already on sale. The notes from today's image, there's a category for webinar notes, just $5. And then if you want to purchase any Topaz products, if you use my link, and this is also on my website, and then use the code MeredithImages at checkout, you can save 15%. I hope you all enjoyed the webinar. I really appreciate you all joining. Hopefully everything goes well with the recording, and I will send that link out as soon as, I know it takes some time for it to process, so it'll probably go out tomorrow. Thanks again, and hope to see you all soon. Stay safe, stay indoors, and stay healthy. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Now you can answer some of these